The Arri-S is a 16mm wild sound motion picture camera. We have it set up here with a zoom lens. To load the Arri-S, we're going to first remove the door, turn the switch to open, and lift the entire door off, placing it on its back safely. Inside the camera, we have the feed reel, sprocketed rollers, keepers, pressure plate and gate area, and take-up spool. To begin loading, first we're going to take and remove our feed roller, the empty reel on here, by pressing in on the center of the spindle. We're going to need this later on. In subdued lighting, I'm going to begin loading the film. I want to remove my film from the package, place it on the feed spindle. I want to click it into place with the film rolling off down towards the bottom. Now I'm going to need about 2 feet of slack to actually thread the camera. So our first step is to open the keepers so that we can actually pull the film through the sprocketed roller. Just wrapping that around, making sure that the sprocket holes get into the sprockets, and then we're going to close this keeper to keep that on track. Our next step is to open the pressure plate. Now there's a tiny little handle or knob right here that I'm going to apply a little bit of pressure towards the back of the camera, and it will spring-loaded. It is spring-loaded and will open up. The next step is for me to actually put the film into the gate area. Now I need to make sure that the registration pin is out, and I do this by using the inching knob on the back of the motor. So you can see here that the registration pin has just moved in and is now out. My next step is to slide the film behind the registration pin while at the same time adjusting my top loop to the correct amount. So the film needs to slide behind that registration pin and sort of lock it in place. And then I will advance the film slightly to bring that registration pin back in while in a sprocket hole. And then advance the inching knob so that it's in there. All right, my next step here, I'm going to close the pressure plate, and that's going to show me how my top loop is doing. The next step is for me to actually thread the film through the second sprocketed roller here. So again, I will open up the keeper and bring the film through that. So I want that to be the correct size, not too tight so that it'll cause the pressure plate to pop open, but not too loose that it will actually drag and scratch on the bottom of the interior of the camera. Once I have my film set into a sprocket, I can again close those keepers until there's a small click. I can see that the top loop is just approaching and maybe in this case almost touching the top spindle there, or top spool. Bottom loop should also be almost touching the bottom, but not quite touching the bottom of the camera, and we'll test that out in just a moment. One of the last steps here is for me to actually take the film that is remaining here, and again I've brought back that empty spool that hopefully the last user of this camera has left me as my take-up spin spool. I'm going to thread the film into the slot in that spool and wrap it around a couple of times in the correct direction, and then place it on the spindle, hopefully aligning the squares. I want to make sure that's nice and tight, and absolutely no tape should be used in the take-up spool there. Next, I'm going to turn the inching knob and make sure that the film is traveling through correctly so that the top loop and the bottom loop are not going too low or too high. This also shows me that the take-up spindle here is working properly. Now I'm going to connect a power cable to the camera. This particular camera has been modified to accept an XLR, 4-pin XLR. So with the camera still open after I finish loading, I can actually check to make sure that my advancing is working beyond the inching knob. Inside the camera is the mechanism that is controlled from the outside door. I can actually press that down to see if the motor is working and properly pulling the film through the camera. Now that I've finished loading, I'm actually ready to put the door back on. I want to make sure that the position is in the open as when I took it off. I also want to make sure that my activating button is not depressed. This can cause harm to the activating switch inside the camera. I'll firmly place that on and close it up. And again, I want to run a little bit of film so that it may have been fogged during loading so that I'm ready to shoot. Press once to activate the switch, press again to turn it off. To protect against any light leaks that may occur while shooting, I may want to put some black camera tape along the seam of the door in the camera. This latch right here actually allows me to add a 400-foot magazine to the camera, but on this particular model, we're not using that. I just want to make sure that this door is on there and secure, so I don't need to take that off. But I may also want to add some black camera tape to that. On the right side of the camera are some dials. The top one is the tachometer, which shows us how many frames per second the motor is rolling. Now we want to check this after we've actually loaded the film because the motor will have strain or pull on it. Right now it's showing that we're running at 24 frames per second. I can control the speed of the camera with the motor. It's on the bottom right side, and I can rotate that motor to the right to increase the speed, going up to 48 frames per second. Or reduce it and go down to as little as 6 frames per second. The dials below the tachometer are for feet and number of frames. So this counter must be reset after I've loaded the film. I push in with my finger and go to 0. And as you can see, if I back it up even further, it actually goes to 110. So this was, if I reset it to 0, it should, as I roll film, show me how many feet I've actually shot. The counter below is showing me how many frames I've shot. So you see that there are 40 frames per foot, and so that dial is moving much quicker. The main mechanism of the motor changes the speed or frames per second of the camera. The first inner dial here changes the direction of the motor. This camera, the Arri-S, is capable of running in reverse. So by flipping it to R, in the direction of R, I've actually turned the motor in reverse. So the film will actually run in reverse. Now the counter, unfortunately, does not work, or the tachometer in reverse. So if your tachometer is not working and your film seems to be unloading all by itself, then maybe the motor is in reverse. Make sure that your motor is running in forwards when you're loading the camera. As previously discussed, this is the inching knob. So this outer ring is for moving the camera mechanism forward or in reverse, frame by frame. The viewing system on an Arri-S is built into the door, and part of that viewing system is the diopter. So to set the diopter, we'll actually need to adjust this ring here to your eye so that it is sharp. This ring here, you do not need to make adjustments to. This is for removing the eyepiece itself. If the viewing system is black or partially blocked, it may be because the shutter has stopped halfway through the frame. So we just need to adjust the inching knob to the point where my mirror is reflecting the image. So I'm moving the inching knob to bring that mirror into place. The activating switch may look different on your particular Arri-S, but this one is a 2-button process where one button is pressed and the second button is pressed to deactivate. This Arri-S is equipped with a 3-lens turret, so I could have 3 lenses on this. This particular one is outfitted with a zoom lens, so the other 2 ports are covered. To remove the lens, I'll need to disengage the retainer clip in the lens mount. And I do that by pressing in with my thumb and forefinger, and then with this particular mount, the Arri standard mount, I'm going to simply pull the lens straight off. Inside the lens port is a small tongue that will match up with a groove in the lens of the Arri standard mount. On the bottom and the top, we can also see the lens retainer clips that we deactivated to remove the lens. When mounting the lens, I want to follow the same procedure I had in removing it. So I need to depress the lens retaining clips and insert the lens straight in, no twisting or turning. Some later model Arri-S's are equipped with a bayonet mount on one of the ports. This lens port can also take Arri standard mounts as well as the improved bayonet style mount. Notice the two slots here, and this is to receive the bayonet mount lenses. The Arri bayonet mount lens, I mount it by inserting the tabs into the slots. I give it an 1/8 turn clockwise until it clicks. To remove, I still have to push in on both retainer clips here that are retaining the lens and grab a hold of the solid or rigid part of the lens 1/8 counterclockwise and straight out. Another Arri-S that you may check out has 2 or 3 prime lenses attached to it. Working with the prime lens, I have the option of using a matte box for holding filters and also for protecting the lens from lens flares. Each of the cameras that is equipped with a prime lens comes with a matte box and rail system. It's attached to the shoe that is above the lens turret, and this is usually fixed with this screw. We loosen these two here and back it up to the lens. Now, depending on the focal length of the lens, I may be able to extend this matte box before it comes into view.